What if I told you the most powerful military on earth lost to farmers in sandals? Yes, America, armed with jets, tanks, and napalm, walked away defeated. But why? How could that even happen? It began long before US troops arrived. Vietnam had already bled for decades under French colonial rule. After World War II, the Vietnamese weren't fighting for ideology, they were fighting for survival. And one man would rise from the shadows, Ho Chi Minh. The US backed No Dinh Diem in South Vietnam. On paper, he was their man. In reality, corrupt, ruthless, hated by his own people. Imagine trying to win hearts with barbed wire and prison camps. It was gasoline on a fire. Washington whispered one word, domino. If Vietnam fell to communism, they feared Asia would topple like a line of tiles. That fear, more than anything, dragged America deeper into the jungle. One August night, 1964. Shots fired, or were they? A supposed North Vietnamese attack on US ships became the excuse to unleash full-scale war. The truth? Historians still debate if it ever happened. But the die was cast. By 1965, boots hit the ground. Fresh-faced kids, barely out of high school, stepping into a land they couldn't pronounce, fighting an enemy they couldn't see. They thought it'd be quick. They were dead wrong. Vietnam wasn't just land, it was a weapon. Swamps swallowed tanks. Trees hid snipers. The air itself felt hostile. Soldiers said, "You didn't fight the jungle. The jungle fought you." The Viet Cong weren't an army you could pin down. They were shadows, farmers by day, fighters by night. They vanished into tunnels, ambushed from nowhere, then disappeared like smoke. How do you fight an enemy you never see? The US answered with fire. Napalm, sticky flames that clung to skin. Villages turned into infernos. The strategy? Burn the fish to drain the sea. But every scorched hut made more enemies. From 1965, the sky thundered with bombs. More explosives fell on Vietnam than in all of World War II. Yet, the jungle swallowed the craters, and the Vietnamese kept fighting. Could bombs alone break a people's will? Washington measured success by body count. Reports claimed tens of thousands of Viet Cong killed. But in the villages, every funeral added fuel to rage. The math was simple: the more America killed, the more recruits Hanoi gained. Late 1967, rumors spread, something massive was coming. The Tet Offensive. But American generals scoffed. The enemy's on its knees, they said. Were they blind, or did they simply not want to see? January 1968. On the sacred holiday of Tet, the Vietnamese struck everywhere at once, over 100 cities. Even the US Embassy in Saigon was under fire. For Americans watching on TV, it was pure shock. Hadn't they been told the war was almost won? The battle for Hue turned the ancient city into rubble. Street by street, house by house, Marines fought through hell. It was the bloodiest urban battle of the war. And when the smoke cleared, thousands of civilians lay dead. Tet was technically a military failure for the North, but a psychological victory beyond measure. The illusion shattered. America saw the truth: this war wasn't ending anytime soon. For the first time in history, war beamed into living rooms. Families ate dinner while watching villages burn. The smiling generals on screen couldn't drown out the screams echoing from television sets. Back home, young men faced the draft lottery. Birth dates became death sentences. Some fled to Canada. Others burned draft cards in protest. The war wasn't just in Vietnam, it was tearing America apart. "Hell no, we won't go." The chant thundered in the streets. Students clashed with police. Kent State, 1970, National Guardsmen opened fire on unarmed protesters. 4 dead in Ohio. The war was no longer just overseas. 1968, US soldiers entered the village of My Lai. Hours later, hundreds of women, children, even babies, lay dead. The massacre was covered up, until it wasn't. When the photos surfaced, America recoiled in horror. 1969, Richard Nixon took office. He promised peace with honor. But secretly, he expanded the war, bombing Cambodia and Laos. The battlefield grew wider, the lies grew deeper. Through jungle and mountains, the North carved lifelines of supply, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was bombed endlessly, yet it never died. Like veins carrying lifeblood, it kept the war alive. While the US built bases with airstrips and barbed wire, the Vietnamese dug tunnels. Miles of underground cities, kitchens, hospitals, even schools. Soldiers joked, "We own the day. They own the night." B-52 bombers darkened the sky. Yet no matter how many bombs fell, Hanoi refused to kneel. Could steel and fire really crush a people's will? Or did every bomb only harden it? In 1970, US troops stormed into Cambodia to cut off supplies. Instead, they sparked chaos that would unleash the Khmer Rouge. A gamble with consequences far beyond Vietnam. Captured US pilots rotted in cells nicknamed the Hanoi Hilton. Tortured, starved, isolated. Years stolen. When they finally returned, they were walking ghosts. By the early 70s, American morale collapsed. Many soldiers turned to heroin. Units fell apart. Jungle patrols became nightmares of paranoia, confusion, and addiction. It's one of the darkest secrets. American soldiers, so broken, sometimes killed their own officers with grenades. When your enemy isn't just out there, but right behind you, what does that do to an army? Vietnamization. Train the South Vietnamese to fight, while US troops pull out. On paper, it was brilliant. In reality, South Vietnam's army wasn't ready. Could they really stand alone? Diplomats met in Paris to end the war. But while pens scratched treaties, guns kept firing. Peace was always just around the corner, but somehow never arrived. December 1972. Nixon unleashed Linebacker 2, the Christmas bombings. Hanoi shook under waves of B-52s. The message, surrender, or else. But the Vietnamese endured, teeth clenched against the storm. January 1973. At last, a deal. US troops would leave. Prisoners would be returned. Nixon declared peace with honor. But was it truly peace, or just America washing its hands? With US troops gone, South Vietnam stood alone. American promises of aid shrank into silence. The giant had walked away, leaving its ally exposed to the wolves. 1975, the North Vietnamese surged south. City after city fell. South Vietnam's army crumbled. Panic swept the streets. The end was no longer years away, it was days. April 30th, 1975. Helicopters roared above the US Embassy, desperate to evacuate. Crowds clawed at the gates, begging to escape. And then, the tanks rolled in. The flag of the South was torn down. Saigon had fallen. The iconic image, a helicopter lifting off a rooftop, desperate figures reaching upward, left behind. For many, that was the last glimpse of freedom. For Vietnam, victory came at a terrible price. Cities reduced to ash. Millions dead. Families torn apart. The land still scarred with craters, mines, and poisoned soil. For America, it was more than defeat. It was humiliation. Confidence shattered. Trust in government destroyed. The word Vietnam became a scar on the national soul. Veterans came home not to cheers, but to silence, or worse, hatred. PTSD haunted them. Some never escaped the jungle, even decades later. The war didn't end when the shooting stopped. The Vietnam War taught the world that technology alone cannot win hearts. That a superpower can bleed at the hands of peasants with determination. And that wars are not just fought in jungles, but in the minds of nations. So, what was it all for? 20 years of blood, fire, and tears. Millions dead. A nation divided. And still, no clear answer. Vietnam remains the war America wants to forget, but never can. And maybe that's the cruelest truth of all.